vrising is one of the rare W stories for early access launches. Yes, we had quite a few of great games that started with early access and then moved on to the full releases, but you haven't heard about a lot of different failures. And thankfully, vrising is not one of them. But unfortunately, this game is very misunderstood by many players, and not just players. And here I want to talk about that misunderstanding. Why vrising is a great game, but not in a way that you might think. And let's start discussing about what vrising actually is for the ones who doesn't know. vrising is an ARPG where you play as a vampire. Yep, you're practically playing as a bad guy. And technically this game is more of a survival than an RPG. And it has more elements of games like Valheim than of games like Diablo. First, you start by creating a server or joining a server. And that's an important bit that I want you to remember. And you move on to creating your own vampire. You awaken and your first goal is to build your castle, or rather find a place to build your castle. And castle building is extremely important part in this game because this is the place where you do absolute majority of your crafting and preparing for your future battles. The world itself is of course open world, and it is not randomly generated, it's a fixed world. And you move around to start collecting resources to build your first crafting stations and to build up your first gear. And let's shortly talk about the moving around part, because you are a vampire and this game has day and night cycle. So basically it's much more difficult to move around during the daytime than during the nighttime, because during daytime the sun will pretty much instantly kill you. Well, it gives you a few seconds before it will start damaging you, but still it is pretty much lethal for you. However, you're free to move in the shadows, and in most places the shadows are abundant, so you can just move around pretty freely. It's not easy, it adds a little bit more challenge to the game, but you don't really need to wait out the days to play the game normally. You can play this game during daytime as well. Again, during the day or during the night you collect all those resources, and then what you'll need to do is actually to craft a gear. And crafting gear is extremely important because this game does not technically have a leveling system, meaning that you cannot grind actually mobs in order to get higher levels. The game's level system is actually purely tied to the gear that you have. The higher gear level you have, the higher level you will be. However, even though you don't have an XP progression, you do have a progression through the game, and this is through so-called V-blood system. V-blood is basically a blood that is carried by certain bosses in the world, and you need to progress through the bosses to unlock different gear and different parts of your castle. And that is the main progression of the game. And here you also unlock different magical spells and magical schools as well. And there are numerous bosses scattered around the world that you will seek out deliberately or stumble upon randomly. Those bosses are walking around or just placed in an open world. By defeating those bosses, you unlock different recipes for the buildings, for the crafting stations, for the weapons, different spells, and of course different gear as well. An entire gameplay loop revolves around that. You go gather resources, build up your castle, find your V-blood victim, unlock new stuff, get back, upgrade your castle, build up your new gear, or if you don't have resources, go around and gather resources, and then repeat this process over and over and over again. And to be fair, it sounds pretty boring, but in reality, it's not, because game gives you really good sense of progression and a really good sense of power, and also gives you quite challenging bosses as well, especially if you're gonna play on a brutal mode. And on a brutal mode, this game is exceptionally difficult. Game also technically has some type of rudimentary class system, and this class system is tied to the blood consumption, because yeah, you're a vampire and you need to consume blood, and different creatures carry different types of blood, and also those blood have different percentage of purity, and when you consume this blood, you basically gain passive abilities of that certain class. It can be scout, brute, creature, or etc. And the higher the purity of this blood, the more effects that you can get. And technically you can also dominate them and imprison them for repeated storage of blood for your vampire basically. And to be fair, the gameplay loop is extremely fun because game has systems for basically everything. Like for example, for your crafting. You see, your crafting has some kind of bonus system as well. Like for example, you have a basic furnace. Furnace can actually create you the resources faster if it will be placed in a closed room. Basically the room with walls and with a roof. Also, it will generate more resources if you have a special floor type under it. Like in this case, it will be a forge floor type. And yeah, those floor types will be unlocked through the same V-blood system. And it's important this floor type should be in an entire room. So that means that you cannot just create a one giant room, put one floor type and get the bonuses for everything that you have. Every single crafting station will require different floor types, meaning that you need to actually group different crafting stations in different rooms, which kind of forces you to build better castles. Yeah, you will be perfectly fine without that, but it's just an added incentive to do that. It's actually very fun. But now let's get part to the misunderstanding part. And it's in a few things. First, people are trying to play it as a Diablo game, or its alternative like Grim Dawn or Path of Exile, which you should not. Despite this game looking like a Diablo game, this is technically more of a survival than a classical ARPG. PvP, meaning that it's more focused on crafting and gear and building than on a combat or any other things, even though it has all of those elements like loot, recipes, and things like that. So you need to understand that this is more of a survival type game where you need to gather all the different kinds of resources, and in many cases a basic resources like wood and stone and things like that. Now that's a first misunderstanding that you should throw away if you want to play this game, well, successfully. But the second thing is more important, because many people are playing this game solo thinking that this is the most that this game can give, which is absolutely wrong. This game technically is primarily multiplayer game, and if you're playing this game solo, even though you're gonna get a lot of gameplay and it will be extremely fun, the real meat of the game lies in its multiplayer, especially in a PvP. And let me tell you what, the basic thing, which is the base building, is tied towards multiplayer rather than for the single player, because your bases can actually be attacked and destroyed by enemy players and looted as well, and you can do the same thing for the other people as well. And it's first clear when you start moving around the world, because you can technically place your bases or your castles in in special dedicated places. And yeah, there are a lot of places like that. And when you first time get to the multiplayer server, you will understand how crowded the servers can actually be. Yeah, you will actually feel like you are in a medieval town somewhere rather than in the middle of the dark forest. And the danger of moving around is real, because you are going to be encountering the enemy players constantly, and it's far more safer to play it with your friends and move around in groups than moving around solo. And the castle sieges and the castle defenses are also another part of the game that is basically unavailable in a solo game and available in a multiplayer, and it's extremely fun. Yes, difficulty wise you can make game very difficult if you want to play by playing in a brutal mode, but the real difficulty and the real challenge of the game lies in a PvP. And that's a thing that many people are misunderstanding while playing and also reviewing this game as well. This game is great game solo, don't get me wrong, it is a great game. It's not the multiplayer game that also has a good solo part. No, it's an actually great solo game, but it is much better in a PvP, because this game is made to be PvP. Also, another important part, if you're playing this game solo, many people are actually complaining about different type of grind, different type of limitation, and all the running around. You can actually alleviate that by setting up a private game and changing the server settings, and you can adjust a lot of different things, like for example your health multiplier, your damage multipliers, size of resource stacks, amount of resources that can be harvested, the amount of loot, and you can even start with an advanced gear as well from the very beginning. If you want to start the game from the beginning and don't want to go through all of the bosses in the beginning and want to jump to end game as soon as possible, you can actually do that as well. So this game is misunderstood by thinking that this is actually a Diablo game that is primarily playable in a solo. This is not. If you want to play Diablo-like game that you can primarily play solo and have a lot of fun, you can play a game like Grim Dawn that you can watch a review of right here, and you're gonna enjoy this game quite a lot. And if you like RPGs in general and want a list of best 27 RPGs, you can watch it right here as well. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe right here as well. Thanks for being here, and we're gonna see you in the next one. Take care.